Federal government insists no going back on IPs. Ghana sells first 40-year Eurobond. Uncertainty as coronavirus pushes oil prices low. Economic watchers predict prices may drop to $47. And other markets are also counting losses. This is Business Express and it is reaching you from Abuja. I am Leah Katung Babatunde saying thank you for joining the program on the network service of the NTA. Now let's start the business of the day. The Bureau of Public Service Reforms is driving a conversation for a more inclusive society that can guarantee lower costs and benefits to all citizens. The lunchtime reform seminar is themed Transformation and Digitalization of Public Finance Management System in Nigeria, Innovations, Bottlenecks and Way Forward, presented by the Accountant General of the Federation, Ahmed Idris. He believes continuous reorientation and upgrade in line with global best practices will go a long way in entrenching a more acceptable and productive public finance system in Nigeria.
Once we get funds, we resolve that. But if you are dealing with human beings that do not want to understand or that fail to understand, rightly or wrongly, you just need to educate them.
It is the success recorded around public financial management that moved World Bank, IMF to give us those discounts they gave us around our loans.
Public finance management is the third pillar of the National Strategy for Public Service Reforms, and 85% of the aspirations have already been implemented. Now, if you are a federal government employee with any education institution, you may want to hear this. The federal government says it will not for any reason reverse its decision on all agencies coming into the Integrated Payroll and Personnel Information System IPS platform.
We follow all means of diplomacy. We follow all means of decency. We engage, we consult, we even cajole. We were on the field. You have heard that out of 4 unions, 3 in the university and academic community have enrolled onto IPPS. We have total enrollment of about over 70%. What is remaining is less than 30%. So you think because of 30%, the government should jettison this policy? We have to be diplomatic. We don't want rancor. We don't want crisis. But certainly, I can't see government reversing itself.
With the impact of the coronavirus on oil demand and the economy in general, Brent oil prices Tuesday rose to $55.07, while Nigeria's Bonylite stood at $55.35 per barrel. Oil prices are trading below the federal government's benchmark for the 2020 budget, thus posing a threat to the 2020 budget on the assumption of oil production of 2.18 million barrels per day with an oil price benchmark of $57 per barrel. There's growing speculation that OPEC may move up the meeting scheduled for March 5 to 6 to February. OPEC and its allies are now considering moving the meeting to February 14 and 15, 3 weeks earlier than initially planned. Now let's see the prices of oil and other commodities in the global and local markets. The African Tax Administration Forum, ATF, is a platform to promote and facilitate mutual cooperation among African tax administrations. Now, this body is presently meeting in Abuja, and the focus is taxation of the informal sector. Logan Watt is the Executive Secretary of ATF, and he joins us to look at issues around this sector I'd like to call a small but mighty. You're welcome to Business Express.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Okay, great. Let's just hit the ground running. Now, the ILO in 2018 put the informal sector in Africa at 85.8%. That is in terms of employment. But then when we're talking about contribution to growth, how would you place the informal sector?
Well, it's firstly important to understand that the ILO placement of informal sector at 80% employment has different categories of that informal sector. Firstly, there's the pure informal sector, which employs largely on the agricultural and the subsistence side people trading, and they don't earn enough to make it worth collecting taxes from, because they basically sell and buy to make an ends meet. In that number that employs people, of that 84%, is also the micro and medium enterprises. And they are informal simply because they're not registered. They're not registered as a business, nor are they registered for taxes, and the employees are not registered. You also have medium and small enterprises, also partly registered, partly employees registered, partly registered for tax. So in these categories, no taxes or very little taxes are being paid to the fiscus. So the biggest part of revenue that African governments, including Nigeria, have, non-oil, comes from multinational corporations, personal income tax and VAT. And so disproportionate to the amount of people they employ, their actual contributions to the fiscus is rather through value-added tax because of their purchase of goods and services, and not directly to the fiscus because they fall outside of the tax net. And that's exactly what we'll be discussing the next 2 days.
Okay, so let's still keep it with Nigeria, where
Yes.
the vast majority of people in this informal sector seem to be so slippery to be dragged into the tax net. How would this effort you're driving get these people brought in?
Well, there's a number of things we need to look at. Number one, a small business or an informal business often do not pay tax because it is difficult to do so. Either the administration is difficult, the amount of forms you must fill in, the way to stay compliant is tedious and costs money and takes them away from making their money in their business. So one of the first things we must do is to look at ways in which it can become easy for smaller businesses to comply. And one of the ways to do that, and Nigeria has introduced some of that, is to have what we call a presumptive tax or a turnover tax. So in Nigeria, if your turnover is, I believe, around 20 million naira, you do not have to pay tax. You fall outside of the net. So when your turnover is then between 20 million and another number, is then to say what are the 2 or 3 steps you must do. Because you can have what is called a turnover tax and say if between 20 million and, for example, 100 million naira, you only have to give 10%. That means that business do not have to hand in documents and accounts and audited statements. As part of its business plan, it provides for 10% to FIRS. So that is the examples of ease of compliance. The second part, very briefly, is businesses, especially the informal sector, to migrate to formality. One of the things is that when you start your business and paying tax is not part of your business culture, one of the first things you want to see is to get value for money. And so the governments must also play a role by making the business environment, the markets that they build, the places where business is located, access to finance, access to credit, and so on. If those things are made easier, you will find that the process of registering those businesses becomes easier. Lastly,
yeah, I was also going to ask you, the dearth of infrastructure in Africa, the continent as a whole, do we attribute this to poor performance of the informal sector in paying taxes? How, if we're attributing that now, what is the role of infrastructure in making people pay tax?
Well, when you invest in anything, whether it's paying tax or whether you invest in an insurance policy or whether you invest money in a bank, you expect interest. And so when you pay taxes, you also expect services. And so the provision of infrastructure is a core part of the success in getting the informal sector to become compliant.
But somehow the Nigerian scenario is a bit funny. You have people want to see everything on ground before they pay tax.
Well, that is a broader issue of the trust between citizens and the state, because tax paying is a social contract. I pay to the state and the state provide services. If there is a history of citizens feeling they are disappointed, then they would say, no, first provide those services. So it's really what we call a chicken and egg situation. The truth is that the state cannot provide the services if it doesn't have the funding. In the world where the state has the funding and do not provide the service, you cannot blame the citizen for being skeptical. I think that for Nigeria or any other country, it's important that we examine that relationship. But the main point is to get informal sector compliant, give them something that they can feel and touch to see a benefit for themselves.
So talking about the chicken and the egg, what do you see the Finance Act now, Nigeria, which is given a lot of attention to changing laws around the tax system and its administration. How do you see the tax system in Nigeria performing in 2020?
Firstly, I see a lot of progress in Nigerian tax administration. Number one, 2 years ago, Nigeria's non-tax oil revenue was less than 4% of GDP. The African average of tax to GDP is 18%. The OECD or the developed country average is 37%. So Nigeria was only collecting 4% from non-oil. And in a world, as you reported earlier, of pressure on oil prices, where is the fiscus going to get money from to run the country, to pay for education and school, to defend against coronavirus? It has to come from broadening the tax base. So Nigeria focusing on enhanced tax administration and better policies will go a long way to improving. So in the last 2 years, that has moved from, the tax to GDP ratio in Nigeria has moved from under 4%, I believe it's now around 7-8%. Because of a few things. We've helped Nigeria deal with multinational taxation and including introducing laws on intercompany transactions and interest deductibility and a number of areas of taxation where money flows out that should be caught in the tax net, but the laws were weak. So in ATAF, we've also assisted Nigeria over the past 3 years to strengthen those laws. So you can do some minimal action, strengthening laws, strengthening policy, automating your tax administration system, and through doing that, without increasing anything, you can actually collect a lot more taxes, because a lot of those taxes are lost, not because people do not want to pay, but because we don't have the laws or the administrative capability. We don't invest enough.
And now simplifying the process for Nigeria now, using digital platforms, you can actually file your reports via email. And of course, this has been identified to be making the process efficient, transparent, and more acceptable. So to bring it down to the common man now, how valuable is the mobile phone we hold in our hands?
That is critical to the future of what taxation and tax administration is in Africa, because mobile telephony reaches the widest area of people on this continent in a way that we've never reached them before. It reaches the agricultural lady on the farm, it reaches the CEO in the office in Lagos. And through digital communication, people should be able to do tax returns on their phone. They should be able to register cash transactions, and through that telephone transaction be able to generate financial accounts if you're small and medium-sized businesses.
So we need to be seeing more of education?
Not only, we must invest in the infrastructure. And a good place to look is in Kenya.
Great.
Kenya is the most advanced in the world, in the whole world, in dealing with the using of mobile telephones to do business. Not only payments, but also financial records, also intercompany transactions. All of that, and because it's that phone is linked to the individual, to the bank, to the revenue authority, all of that speaks to one piece of information in one hand, and the revenue authority has a single view of the taxpayer. It takes investment to do this, it takes a will to do this, it is possible. It can make life a lot easier for the revenue authority, for the informal sector, for the person in the street to work. So investing in digitalization is the future.
Can we just keep you for some more days in Nigeria?
Well, I must leave on Friday, but I do come back a lot. Mr. Nami, the new executive chairman of FRS, is the president, is the chairman of the ATF Council, as was Mr. Fowler before him. And so I do have to come here from time to time. So when I do come here, I'll be happy to join your studio.
Yeah, so fantastic. We'll be keeping you in Nigeria, not just in the studio now, and of course with all other policymakers. It was nice talking to you on Business Express.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, thank you very much for coming. So let's move on now. The NSE All-Share Index for 5th of February declined by 1.19% to close at 28,093.76 basis points, with market capitalization closing out the day at 14.4 trillion naira, I beg your pardon, 350.2 million shares worth 4.2 billion naira exchanged hands in 4,729 deals. Zenith Bank, FBN Holdings, and FCMB were the most active stocks. CAP led the gainers, followed by UBN and Dangote Sugar, while Mobil, Dangote Cement, and Nigerian Breweries topped the decliners. Now, the effect of the outbreak of the coronavirus seems not to be leaving any country out. Rwandans who import and export to China say that since the breakout of the virus, business has been affected in various ways. 2016 statistics show that Rwanda exports $4.8 million worth of goods and imports $377.8 million worth of goods from China. Some Rwandan businessmen and women say that they might have to look for other options if the outbreak of the virus persists.
We used to buy from elsewhere, but most goods came from China. However, I believe we have options like India, Pakistan, Turkey, Thailand, Vietnam, among other countries. It has affected us, especially in trying to get the raw materials and fabrics, because we do not manufacture these in the country. We get them from China. Our goods are now stuck, and we might have delays in delivery because of this virus. We have been affected because Rwanda cancelled their flights to China, and now we have to go through Ethiopia, which is double the costs and more expensive compared to Rwanda.
Now, of course, coronavirus continues to take toll on markets across the globe, and Boss De Abel has updates of global stocks.
Stocks in early trading for Wednesday, 5th February rallied as markets recovered from a huge sell-off after worries of coronavirus. In Asia, stocks rebounded. Shanghai Composite was up 1.25% to 2,818.09. Nikkei 1.02% to 23,319.56. And the Hang Seng Index topped 0.42%. U.S. stock index futures continue to bounce back. Dow futures increased by 1.44%. The S&P 500 1.5%, and Nasdaq Composite also rose 2.10%. The European market traded slightly higher. DAX appreciated by 1.11%, FTSE 100 1.17%, and CAC 40 also advanced 1.23%. Here in Africa, the market had mixed indices. On the bullish territory were South Africa's JSE Africa Top 40 by 1.17%, Nairobi's All-Share 0.23%, and Tunisia's Tunidex 0.2%, while the bearish stocks were Namibia's overall index by 0.03% and Ghana's GSA Composite 0.05%.
Now, still talking markets, let's see how the Naira is faring alongside other major currencies. Ghana sold Sub-Saharan Africa's longest ever euro bond as part of a $3 billion deal that was almost 5 times oversubscribed. It issued a $750 million tranche, which amortizes and has an average life of 40 years at 8.875%, making it the highest yielding sovereign dollar bond so far this year. The government also sold $1.25 billion of debt with an average maturity of 6 years and a yield of 6.375%. A third segment of $1 billion has an average life of 14 years, yielding 8%. And of course, this is where we end this edition of Business Express. Be informed that all previous episodes are available on YouTube on the NTA's channel. You can also communicate with us on Twitter, and the handle is NTA News Now. The hashtag is BizExp. Join us again Friday for another edition of the program. I am Leah Kating Babatunde, wishing you a very wonderful time out there.